Welcome back to Velentra Tales, wishing you a truly good day, filled with calm moments and gentle things ahead. And now, let's dive together into today's story.
I thought my husband and his brothers were joking when they left me stranded at a rest stop 97 miles from nowhere. Find your own way back. They laughed as they drove off. I never came home. 2 years later he found me. 52 desperate messages waiting. Find your own way back, babe. That's what Brandon yelled before he gunned the engine. His brothers Cole and Grant were laughing so hard I could still hear them half a mile down Highway 77. I stood there in the middle of the Arizona desert watching their taillights fade, and something inside me just snapped. Not broke, snapped. Like a wire pulled too tight, finally cutting loose. They thought they were teaching me a lesson about independence. They had no idea what they'd actually done. They'd set me free. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I ended up at that rest stop, you need to know how it all began. You need to know about the man I thought Brandon was, and the life I thought we were building together. Before we continue, thank you for being here. If you believe no one deserves to be abandoned and humiliated, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach others who need to hear this. Now let's see what happened next. I met Brandon Mercer 7 years ago at a charity 5K in Tucson. I wasn't a runner, still aren't, but my friend Sarah dragged me along because she thought I needed to get out more. I was 24, grinding through freelance graphic design projects in my cramped apartment, living on iced coffee and the stubborn belief that my business would eventually take off. Brandon was running the entire course in full paramedic gear. 50 pounds of equipment in September heat. He crossed the finish line drenched in sweat, grinning like he'd just won the lottery instead of voluntarily tortured himself for charity. We ended up at the hydration tent afterward, both reaching for the last bottle of water. He saw me first and handed it over without hesitation. "You look like you need it more than me," he said, even though he'd just run 3 miles in gear that probably weighed more than I did. That was Brandon. At least, that was the Brandon I thought I knew. He remembered everything in those early days. My coffee order: iced vanilla latte with oat milk, no whipped cream. How I hated cilantro because it tasted like dish soap. The way I needed absolute silence when I worked, couldn't even handle background music. He'd tiptoe past my home office when I was on deadline, leaving little snacks outside the door like he was feeding a shy cat. After a year of dating, he proposed on a hiking trail outside the city. Sunset painted the desert orange and pink. Tucson spread out below us like someone had spilled a box of lights across the valley. I cried. I said yes. I thought I'd found the person I was supposed to spend my life with. We got married at a small vineyard ceremony. 50 guests. String lights wrapped around mesquite trees. My mom sobbed through the entire thing in the front row. Brandon's parents flew in from Nevada, beaming with pride. His brothers were there too, Cole and Grant, standing up as groomsmen. Back then they were just part of the background. Friendly enough. Normal. I didn't know yet how much space they'd take up in my marriage. How much power I'd give them without realizing it. The first year was good. Really good. I was building my client base. Brandon was working at the fire department saving lives. And we had this little house in Midtown with a backyard barely big enough for a grill and 2 folding chairs. We'd sit out there on weekends drinking cheap beer, talking about the future. Maybe kids someday. A bigger place eventually. Growing old together. Simple dreams. The kind that felt achievable. Then Cole and Grant started coming around more often. Cole was 34, 2 years older than Brandon. He worked as a diesel mechanic and always smelled like motor oil and cigarettes. He had this way of talking where everything sounded like a challenge, like he was daring you to disagree with him. Grant was 29, the youngest, bouncing between construction jobs and unemployment. He had a smirk that never quite left his face, like he knew something you didn't. At first, I thought their comments were just typical brother banter. "She's got you domesticated, bro," Cole announced at our first married couple barbecue, loud enough for everyone on the patio to hear. Grant would laugh and add, "Whipped. That's the technical term." Brandon would roll his eyes, throw his arm around my shoulders, tell them to knock it off. I'd smile, laugh it off, tell myself that's just how brothers talk to each other. But then I started noticing things. Brandon began canceling our plans whenever his brothers called. Our anniversary dinner got postponed because Cole's truck broke down, and apparently I was supposed to understand that towing your brother's vehicle was more important than celebrating 6 years of marriage. My 30th birthday was completely forgotten because Grant convinced Brandon to go to some motorcycle rally in Flagstaff. It's just one weekend, babe, Brandon said when I finally brought it up 3 days later. Family's important, you know? I nodded, swallowed my hurt. 'Cause he was right, family was important. I just didn't realize yet that when he said family, he didn't actually mean me. The cracks started appearing everywhere once I knew where to look. Brandon's phone became a third person in our relationship. It would buzz during dinner, during movies, during conversations I thought we were having. He'd glance down, chuckle at whatever Cole or Grant had sent, then put it face down on the table. When I asked what was funny, he'd wave his hand dismissively. Just guy stuff, babe. You wouldn't get it. I started hearing things I wasn't supposed to hear. Brandon on speakerphone in the garage, laughing with his brothers about me. How I needed the thermostat at exactly 72 degrees. How I'd reorganized his tools without asking, putting everything in labeled bins like some kind of control freak. Their laughter bounced off the concrete walls while I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, holding a dish towel and wondering when I'd become the punchline. But these were small things. Petty things. The kind of things that felt too insignificant to start a fight over. So I didn't fight. I adjusted. I made myself smaller, quieter, easier. I laughed at Cole's jokes even when they weren't funny. I complimented Grant on job interviews that never led anywhere. I cooked Brandon's favorite meals and pretended not to notice when he spent our date nights texting his brothers. I told myself this was what marriage looked like. Compromise. Sacrifice. Choosing your battles. I told myself I was being too sensitive, too needy, too much. I told myself a lot of lies back then. When Brandon announced his buddy Mike was getting married in Sedona, I was actually excited at first. A weekend away. Just the two of us. A chance to reconnect. But then he added, I was thinking we could bring Cole and Grant. Make it a guy's trip. You don't mind, right? That twist in my stomach should have been my answer. But instead I smiled and said, sure, that sounds fun. 'Cause that's what I did. I said sure. I said yes. I said whatever kept the peace. Brandon insisted we take his truck instead of my Honda. More room for everyone, he explained. It made sense. Except it also meant I'd be trapped for 3 hours with no escape route if things went south. The drive to Sedona should have been my warning. Should have been the moment I demanded he turn around. The brothers whispered in the backseat like kids planning mischief. Every time I glanced back, they'd go quiet and exchange looks. Brandon's hand stayed locked on the steering wheel, knuckles white, eyes fixed on the road. What are you guys talking about back there? I asked once, trying to sound casual. Nothing, Haley, Grant said with that permanent smirk. Just brother stuff. Brandon didn't look at me. Didn't defend me. Didn't tell them to cut it out. All three of them kept checking their phones. Trading glances in the rearview mirror. Like they were following some script I hadn't been given. By the time we pulled into the Cactus Creek rest stop, 97 miles from home, my hands were shaking. The place was basically abandoned. One building with bathrooms. A vending machine. A faded sign warning that the next services were 50 miles ahead. Bathroom break, Brandon announced, pulling up to the gas pump. I grabbed my purse and practically ran for the restroom, just wanting a minute alone to breathe. The bathroom was disgusting. Broken soap dispenser. No paper towels. But I splashed water on my face and told myself I was being paranoid. That I was manufacturing problems that didn't exist. When I walked back out into the blinding September heat, they were already in the truck. Engine running. All three of them staring at me through the windshield. I walked toward the passenger door, confused but not yet scared. Brandon rolled down the window. That's when I saw his smile. Not the smile I'd fallen in love with 7 years ago. Something else. Something colder. And that's when he said it. Find your own way back, babe. The engine roared. Gravel sprayed. And just like that, the life I thought I had disappeared into the desert heat. For the first 10 minutes, I actually waited for them to come back. I stood in that parking lot, dust settling on my skin, convinced this was just the setup to some stupid joke. They'd circle back any second now, pull up laughing, and Brandon would lean out the window saying, "Got you," like this was all some elaborate prank I was supposed to find hilarious. But the highway stayed empty. Nothing but heat waves rising off the asphalt and the distant shape of mountains that looked like they'd been cut from cardboard and propped against the sky. My phone showed 0 bars. I tried anyway, holding it up like some kind of useless talisman, waiting for even 1 bar to appear. Nothing. I was standing at the edge of civilization, and civilization had decided I didn't exist. The temperature had to be pushing 105 degrees. The kind of heat that makes your lungs hurt when you breathe. I had half a bottle of water in my purse and $12 cash. The vending machine outside the restroom building looked like it hadn't been restocked since the 90s. That's when the reality started sinking in. Not all at once. More like cold water filling a bathtub 1 degree at a time until suddenly you realize you're freezing. They weren't coming back. Brandon had actually left me here. His brothers had convinced him to abandon his wife in the middle of the desert, and he'd gone along with it. Smiled while he did it. Made it sound like he was doing me a favor. It's a lesson, babe. I thought about his face when he said those words. The casual cruelty in it. Like I was a dog who needed training instead of a person he'd promised to love. I started walking. Highway 77 stretched ahead like a ribbon someone had dropped and forgotten. My sandals weren't made for this. Strappy things I'd worn because they looked cute, not because they were functional. Within half a mile I could feel blisters forming on both heels. I ignored them. Focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Cars passed occasionally. Not many, but enough that I started hoping one would stop. I tried waving a few times, but they just sped up, probably thinking I was dangerous or crazy. A woman alone on a desert highway, no broken down car in sight. It didn't make sense to them. And I couldn't exactly explain that my husband had abandoned me as part of some sick bonding ritual with his brothers. The sun beat down without mercy. I could feel my shoulders burning through my thin shirt. My mouth was dry despite rationing the water. I kept checking my phone even though I knew it was pointless. Still 0 bars. Still just me and the endless stretch of nothing. By mile 2 the shock was wearing off and something else was taking its place. Bigger. The kind that starts in your stomach and spreads outward like poison. All those little moments I'd ignored suddenly lined up in my head like dominoes. Brandon canceling our anniversary. Forgetting my birthday. The constant texting during date nights. The jokes at my expense that I was supposed to just laugh off. The way he'd wave his hand dismissively whenever I tried to tell him how his brothers made me feel. You're too sensitive, babe. It's just how they are. Family's important. The whispers in the backseat during the drive suddenly made perfect sense. The exchanged looks. The way they'd all been checking their phones like they were coordinating something. This whole weekend had been engineered for this moment. They'd planned it. Discussed it. Probably laughed about it. And I'd just gone along smiling and nodding, being the easy wife who never complained. I was so angry I could barely see straight. At mile 3 I heard the sound of an engine slowing down behind me. I turned, squinting against the sun, and saw an RV pulling onto the shoulder. It was one of those massive things, the kind retired people drive across the country collecting refrigerator magnets from every state. The passenger window rolled down and a woman's face appeared. She had white hair and kind eyes behind purple-framed glasses. "Honey, do you need help?" she asked. And just like that I broke. I tried to explain, tried to say something coherent about my husband and the rest stop and being stranded, but it came out as incoherent sobbing. The woman, whose name I'd learned was Linda, just opened the door and helped me inside where the air conditioning felt like jumping into a cold pool. Her husband Ron was driving. He didn't ask questions, just handed me a bottle of water from their cooler and told me to drink slowly. Linda sat next to me, rubbing my back while I cried, and didn't push me to explain until I was ready. When I finally got the story out, they both went quiet for a long moment. "That's not a prank," Linda said finally, her voice tight. "That's abuse." The word hit me harder than it should have. Abuse. I'd never thought of it that way. Brandon had never hit me, never screamed at me. He just diminished me. Made me smaller. Made me believe that my feelings didn't matter as much as his brother's entertainment. "We're heading to Phoenix," Ron said from the driver's seat. "Not Tucson. But Phoenix has a Greyhound station if you need to get somewhere." I nodded, wiping my face with the tissue Linda handed me. "Phoenix. Not home. Somewhere else." They talked about their grandchildren during the drive. 3 boys, all under 10. Linda showed me pictures on her phone, gap-toothed smiles and messy hair. Normal family stuff. The kind of thing I'd imagine having with Brandon someday. That dream felt ridiculous now. Childish. Somewhere between the highway and Phoenix, listening to these strangers be kind to me for no reason other than basic human decency, I made a decision. I wasn't going home. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. As I suddenly remembered something I'd pushed out of my mind. 2 weeks ago, I'd been in the kitchen making dinner when I heard Brandon on the phone in the garage. He was laughing, really laughing, the kind where you can barely breathe. I'd walked to the doorway and asked what was so funny. He'd waved me away. Just guy stuff, babe. You wouldn't get it. I'd gone back to chopping vegetables, ignored and dismissed like always. Now I understood. He'd been talking to Cole or Grant, probably both. Planning this. They'd been laughing about abandoning me in the desert 2 weeks before they actually did it. Maybe longer. The betrayal of that moment, the premeditation, felt worse than being left at the rest stop. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty. This was calculated. Discussed. Refined. They turned my humiliation into a group project. Ron and Linda dropped me at the Phoenix Greyhound station around 7 p.m. Linda tried to give me money, but I refused. I still had my debit card. I could manage. Before they left, Linda hugged me tight and whispered, "Whatever you decide to do, make sure it's for you. Not for him." I stood inside the bus station staring up at the departure board. Tucson buses left every 2 hours. I could be home by midnight. Walk into our house, confront Brandon, demand an explanation. But what would that accomplish? He'd already shown me exactly who he was. He'd looked me in the eye, smiled, and driven away. What explanation could possibly make that okay? My college roommate Maya lived in San Diego. We hadn't talked in 4 years. Life had gotten busy, we drifted apart the way people do. But she'd sent me a message last Christmas saying if I was ever in California, her door was always open. I pulled out my phone. Still no missed calls from Brandon, which told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't worried. He was probably at the wedding by now, drinking with his brothers, congratulating himself on teaching me some kind of lesson. I walked up to the ticket counter. "1 ticket to San Diego," I said. "One way." The clerk printed the ticket without comment. $140. The bus left in 30 minutes. I turned off my phone before boarding. Powered it completely down. I wanted Brandon to sweat. Wanted him to wonder. Wanted him to feel even a fraction of what he'd put me through. The bus was half empty. I chose a seat near the back and pressed my forehead against the window. As we pulled out of Phoenix and headed west, I watched the desert landscape blur past and thought about all the red flags I'd ignored. The canceled anniversaries. The forgotten birthdays. The constant refrain of family first while treating me like I was optional. 6 hours to San Diego. 6 hours in the dark, crossing state lines, leaving behind the life I'd built. 6 hours to decide I was done being the wife who made herself smaller to fit into someone else's world. The bus hummed along the interstate, and somewhere around the California border, I felt something inside me shift. Not break. Not shatter. Transform. The bus pulled into San Diego at 2 in the morning. The station was nearly empty. Just a few homeless people sleeping on benches and a janitor mopping the floor with slow mechanical strokes. I stood on the curb with my purse and nothing else, breathing in air that smelled like ocean and exhaust, and pulled out my phone. I hadn't turned it on since Phoenix. Part of me was afraid of what I'd find. Part of me didn't care anymore. There was a payphone near the entrance, one of the last relics of a pre-cell phone world. I fed it quarters and dialed Maya's number from memory, praying she hadn't changed it in the 4 years since we'd last spoken. She answered on the third ring, voice thick with sleep. "Hello. Maya, it's Haley." My voice cracked on my own name. I know it's been forever and I know it's the middle of the night, but I didn't know who else to call. There was a pause. Then, "Where are you?" "San Diego. The Greyhound station downtown." "Stay there. I'm coming to get you." No questions. No hesitation. Just immediate action. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone show up for me without conditions attached. 20 minutes later, Maya pulled up in a beat-up Honda Civic, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing scrubs like she'd just gotten off shift. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug that smelled like hospital antiseptic and lavender soap. "Get in," she said. "You can tell me everything when we get home." Her apartment was a small one-bedroom in Ocean Beach, the kind of place where you could hear the waves if you opened the windows. She set me up on her couch with a blanket and a glass of water, then sat cross-legged on the floor in front of me. "Okay," she said gently. "What happened?" So I told her. All of it. The rest stop, the brothers, the planned humiliation. She didn't interrupt, Just listened with the same focused attention she probably gave to patients in the ER where she worked as a nurse. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Are you leaving him?" she finally asked. "Or just making him sweat?" I thought about it for maybe 3 seconds. "I'm leaving him." She nodded like I'd just given the right answer to a test question. "Good. You can stay here as long as you need." That night I didn't check my phone. I showered off 2 days of desert dust and bus station grime, borrowed a pair of Maya's pajamas that smelled like fabric softener, and fell into the deepest sleep I'd had in years. No anxiety dreams. No waking up at 3 a.m. wondering if Brandon was upset about something. Just darkness and the sound of waves and 11 straight hours of nothing. When I woke up the next afternoon, sunlight was streaming through the windows and Maya had already left for her shift. There was a note on the coffee table. "Food in the fridge. Stay as long as you want. We'll talk tonight." I made myself coffee and stood on her tiny balcony, looking out at the Pacific Ocean. People were walking dogs on the beach. A group of surfers sat on their boards waiting for waves. Normal life happening all around me while mine had just imploded. That's when I remembered my phone. I'd left it powered off all night, sitting on the arm of the couch like a bomb I wasn't ready to defuse. But I couldn't avoid it forever. I needed to know what Brandon had done when he realized I wasn't coming home. I turned it on and watched the screen light up. 47 missed calls. 33 voicemails. 62 text messages. All from Brandon. I sat down on the couch and started reading through them chronologically, watching his emotional state deteriorate in real time. The first messages were confusion mixed with annoyance. "Babe, where are you? The joke's over. You can come out now." Like I was hiding behind a building at the rest stop, waiting to jump out and surprise them. Then came irritation. "This isn't funny, Haley. You're making me look bad in front of my brothers." Not concern for my safety. Not guilt for what he'd done. Just embarrassment that I wasn't playing along. The anger messages started around message 20. "You're being ridiculous. It was just a prank. Stop being so dramatic and call me back." Gaslighting via text. Impressive. Around message 35, panic finally set in. "Babe, I'm really worried now. Please just let me know you're okay. I'm sorry if we took it too far. Just come home and we can talk about this." The final messages were pure desperation. I drove back to the rest stop. "You're not there. I called your mom, your sister, everyone. Nobody knows where you are. Haley, please. I'm scared something happened to you. Just send me one text so I know you're alive." Not once, not in a single message, did he actually apologize for abandoning me. Not once did he acknowledge that what he'd done was wrong. Just confusion and irritation that I'd had the audacity to disappear on him instead of coming home apologetic and embarrassed like they'd expected. I deleted every message without responding. Then I did something I'd been thinking about since the bus ride. Something I probably should have done years ago. Brandon and I shared an iCloud account. He'd set it up when we first got married, saying it would be easier to share photos and calendars. I'd never thought much about it. Never had a reason to go snooping through his stuff because I trusted him. But trust was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. I logged into the account from Maya's laptop. His password was still the same, our wedding date, because Brandon wasn't creative about security. Within seconds I had access to everything. His photos. His messages. His entire digital life. I found the group chat almost immediately. It was labeled The Boys with a beer emoji. Brandon, Cole, and Grant. Messages going back 9 months. 9 months. I started scrolling, my stomach twisting tighter with every screen. Cole had suggested it first back in January. We should take her out to the middle of nowhere and leave her. See how long it takes her to figure out how to get home without you holding her hand. Grant's response came 2 minutes later. Dude, yes. She acts like she's so independent with her little design business, but she can't do shit without Brandon. It would be hilarious. I waited, breath held, to see what Brandon would say, hoping he'd shut it down. Tell them they were being idiots. Defend me. Instead, maybe it would be good for her? Like exposure therapy or something. She does kind of rely on me for everything. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the laptop. They'd spent months planning this. Discussing which rest stop would be remote enough but not dangerous. What time of day would maximize discomfort without actual harm. They'd even planned a backup story in case I somehow made it home before them, We thought you caught a ride with someone. We figured you'd be fine. Every detail had been calculated. Every cruelty intentional. But it got worse. I kept scrolling and found months of screenshots. Texts I'd sent Brandon. Sweet messages saying I missed him. Photos of design work I was proud of. Questions about what he wanted for dinner. Normal wife stuff. All of it shared with his brothers. All of it annotated with laughing emojis and mocking comments. One screenshot was a text I'd sent in July. Can't wait to see you tonight, babe. I made your favorite dinner. Cole's comment, gag me. Is she always this needy? Another was a photo of a logo I'd designed for a local bakery, something I'd been really proud of. I'd sent it to Brandon asking what he thought. Grant's response in the group chat. Does she ever talk about anything except work and feelings? Brandon's reply made something inside me go cold. She's not that bad, you guys. But yeah, she can be a lot sometimes. A lot. I'd been too much. Too needy. Too sensitive. Too emotional. Too everything. Except I hadn't been any of those things. I'd been a normal person with normal feelings who'd made the mistake of marrying someone who saw vulnerability as weakness. I closed the laptop and sat on Maya's couch, staring out at the ocean through the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. Beautiful and indifferent. I didn't feel heartbroken. I'd cried all my tears on the bus, on the highway, in the RV with strangers who'd shown me more kindness in an hour than my husband had in months. What I felt now was something different. Something cleaner and sharper and more dangerous. Purpose. Brandon had tried to teach me a lesson about independence. About not relying on him for everything. About being less needy, less emotional, less much. He had no idea what he'd actually done. He'd set me free. And now I was going to teach him what real consequences looked like. The first thing I did the next morning was find a lawyer. Maya had already left for her 12-hour shift at the hospital, but she'd left another note on the coffee table with a name and number scrawled across it. Rebecca Winters, divorce attorney. He helped my friend Lisa. Call her. I sat on the balcony with my phone watching joggers pass on the beach below, and dialed before I could talk myself out of it. A receptionist answered, professional and warm, and somehow I had an appointment for that same afternoon. 2 p.m. Like the universe was finally working with me instead of against me. Rebecca Winters' office was in a building overlooking the harbor, all glass and clean lines. She met me in the waiting room herself. A woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses and a handshake that felt like a promise. Haley, she said. Come on back. Her office was organized but lived in. Law books lined the shelves, framed degrees on the wall, and a photo of 2 teenage boys on her desk. She gestured to the chair across from her and sat down with a legal pad. Maya gave me the basics, she said. But I want to hear it from you. Everything. So I told her. The rest stop. The planning. The group chat messages. I pulled up the screenshots on my phone and slid it across the desk. She read through them in silence, her expression never changing, though I saw her jaw tighten once or twice. When she finally looked up, she handed my phone back and said 5 words that made something in my chest unclench. This is clear-cut abuse. I blinked. Really? Emotional abuse with documented premeditation, she said, writing notes on her pad. Arizona is a no-fault divorce state, which means you don't need to prove wrongdoing to end the marriage. But this evidence ensures he doesn't get a single advantage in asset division. And we can pursue spousal maintenance for business interruption and relocation costs. I don't want his money, I said automatically. Rebecca looked at me over her glasses. You're entitled to half of everything you built together. That's not wanting his money. That's taking what's legally yours. She paused. And frankly, making sure he understands there are consequences for treating another human being like this. I felt tears sting my eyes, not from sadness but relief. Someone believed me. Someone saw what Brandon and his brothers had done and called it what it was. Rebecca handed me a box of tissues even though I wasn't crying yet. You're going to be okay, Haley, she said, her voice gentler now. And he's going to regret ever underestimating you. That afternoon, Maya helped me open a new bank account at a credit union near her apartment. We sat in uncomfortable chairs across from a banker named Steve who processed everything without asking questions. When it was done, I had my own account. My own debit card. My own financial identity separate from Brandon for the first time in 6 years. Then came the hard part. I logged into our joint savings account, the one we'd been building together since we got married. $43,000. Money I'd helped save through years of freelance work while Brandon spent freely on truck modifications and weekend trips with his brothers. Money that was legally half mine under Arizona's community property laws. I transferred $21,500 into my new account. Maya watched over my shoulder. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said and realized I meant it. This wasn't stealing. This was survival. Next, I contacted my 3 biggest clients. A tech startup that needed ongoing branding work, a local restaurant chain, and a boutique hotel group. I drafted careful emails explaining I was relocating to San Diego for personal reasons but could continue all projects remotely. Would that be a problem? All 3 responded within hours. None of them cared where I worked as long as the designs kept coming. Just like that, my income was secure. Then I blocked Brandon's number. Then Cole's. Then Grant's. It felt like closing doors. Final and necessary. Of course, they didn't stop. Within days, they started calling from different numbers. Brandon's work line. Numbers I didn't recognize. Friends' phones. I let everything go to voicemail, and the messages were always the same rotating script of deflection and manipulation. "I don't understand why you're doing this. You're being irrational. We need to talk about this like adults." Never an actual apology. Never acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just confusion and irritation that I wouldn't come home and let them gaslight me in person. I deleted every message without listening to the end. 3 weeks after the rest stop, I was working at a coffee shop near the beach. Some design revisions for the hotel group, when Maya called. "Don't come home yet," she said, her voice tight. "Your husband's here." My stomach dropped. "What?" "He's sitting in his truck outside my building. I saw him from the window. He's just waiting." I closed my laptop with shaking hands. "I'm not coming back there. Not while he's there." "Good. Where are you?" "Coffee shop on Newport." "Stay there. I'm going to handle this." "Maya. Trust me." She hung up before I could argue. I sat there for 20 minutes staring at my phone, imagining Brandon camped outside her apartment like some kind of stalker. How had he even found me? Had he hired a private investigator? Convinced a mutual friend to ask leading questions? My phone buzzed. A text from Maya. Sent him a message from my phone. Told him you don't want to see him and if he doesn't leave I'm calling the cops. He left. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. But the voicemails continued. They always continued. And they started getting uglier. "You can't just run away from our marriage, Haley. That's not how this works. My lawyer says what you're doing is abandonment. You're going to regret this. Cole and Grant feel terrible. They want to apologize. Just give us one chance to make this right." Still no real apology. Still no acknowledgement. Just new tactics. New angles of manipulation disguised as concern. I blocked every new number. Deleted every message. Built a wall between my old life and this new one brick by brick. Living with Maya, I started noticing things I'd forgotten about myself. Small things that felt enormous in their significance. I liked true crime documentaries. Brandon had always mocked them, called them depressing garbage, so I'd stopped watching them. Now Maya and I binged entire series on her couch, yelling at the TV when investigators missed obvious clues. I preferred my coffee black. For years, Brandon had insisted I'd like it better with cream and sugar, and I'd started making it that way because it was easier than arguing. Turned out I'd been right the first time. Black coffee tasted better. I worked best at night. Brandon was an early morning person, up at 5 a.m. for his shift at the fire department, and he'd always made comments when I stayed up late working. "You'd be more productive if you kept normal hours," he'd say. But my brain came alive after 10 p.m. Ideas flowed easier. Designs came together faster. All these tiny pieces of myself I'd filed down or hidden away to make room for Brandon's preferences. Maya and I fell into an easy rhythm. She'd work her 12-hour shifts at the hospital, and I'd have dinner waiting when she got home. Nothing fancy, just pasta or stir-fry or whatever I could make with her limited kitchen supplies. We'd eat on her balcony overlooking the ocean, drinking cheap wine and talking about everything and nothing. She told me about her ex-boyfriend, Derek, who'd convinced her to invest in his business opportunity. Some cryptocurrency scheme that tanked within months. He drained $8,000 from her savings before she finally kicked him out. I felt so stupid, she said one night, watching the sunset turn the ocean orange. Like I should have seen it coming. You're not stupid, I said. You trusted someone you loved. That's not stupidity. That's being human. She looked at me. You know that applies to you too, right? I did. Sort of. I was starting to. The anxiety dreams stopped. The ones where I'd wake up at 3 a.m. in a panic, convinced I'd forgotten something important or done something to upset Brandon. Now I slept through the night, deep and dreamless, and woke up to the sound of waves instead of alarm clocks. I started smiling again. Real smiles, not the performance smiles I'd worn around Brandon's brothers. Maya would say something ridiculous and I'd laugh. Actually laugh. And it felt like remembering a language I used to speak fluently. One morning, about a month after I'd arrived in San Diego, I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about Brandon in over 24 hours. Hadn't checked to see if he'd tried calling from a new number. Hadn't rehearsed arguments in my head or imagined confrontations that would never happen. I just lived. And it felt like the first real breath I'd taken in years. 4 months after the rest stop, Rebecca called me into her office with news I'd been both dreading and anticipating. We're filing today, she said, sliding a stack of papers across her desk. I wanted you to see everything before it goes through. I picked up the petition for dissolution of marriage and stared at my name typed in official legal font. Haley Marie Brennan versus Brandon James Mercer. Seeing it in black and white made it real in a way nothing else had. How long until he gets served? I asked. 48 hours, maybe less. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. Be prepared for him to react. This is when people either accept reality or double down on denial. Brandon doubled down. His attorney's response arrived within a week, and reading it made me feel physically ill. According to their counterclaim, I was the villain in this story. I'd abandoned our marriage without warning or attempt at reconciliation. I was unstable, irrational, running away from a harmless prank between family members. They painted Brandon as the concerned husband desperately trying to save his marriage while his mentally unwell wife refused all contact. I sat in Rebecca's office while she read through the filing, my hands clenched so tight my nails left marks in my palms. They're trying to gaslight you through legal documents, Rebecca said, setting the papers down. But here's the good news. They just handed us everything we need. She'd already been 3 steps ahead. While Brandon's attorney was drafting their fiction, Rebecca had hired a forensic digital specialist who'd pulled GPS data from Brandon's phone records. She spread the timeline across her desk like evidence at a crime scene. Look at this, she said, pointing. Your husband's phone pinged at the Cactus Creek rest stop at 2:17 p.m. on September 14th. Then 18 minutes later, it's pinging along Highway 77 heading north, away from Tucson toward Sedona. No stops. No turnarounds. Straight to the wedding venue, where he checked in at 5:43 p.m. She pulled out more documentation. Social media posts time-stamped and screenshot. Cole and Grant at a bar in Sedona at 9:47 p.m. that same night, raising beers with captions like, "Epic weekend with the boys," and "Teaching life lessons." Another photo showed all 3 of them at breakfast the next morning, hungover but grinning, wearing matching t-shirts that said, "Brotherhood over everything." They documented their own cruelty, Rebecca said, and there was something almost satisfied in her voice. They were so confident you'd come crawling back that they didn't even try to hide the celebration. I stared at the photos. Brandon looked happy, relaxed, like a man who'd just pulled off something clever instead of someone who'd abandoned his wife in the desert. Something fierce and hot rose in my chest. Not quite anger anymore. Something colder. More focused. When do we respond? I asked. I'm filing our counter-response tomorrow. Rebecca gathered the papers. And trust me, they're going to regret every word they wrote. The next blow came from an unexpected direction. I was at Maya's apartment on a Tuesday afternoon, working on a logo redesign for the boutique hotel group, when my phone rang. My mother's name appeared on the screen. We'd been talking more since I'd left. Weekly check-ins where she'd ask how I was doing and I'd give her carefully edited versions of the truth. But something in her voice was different this time. "Haley, honey," she said. "Brandon came by the house." My stomach dropped. "When?" "This morning. He showed up right after your father left for work." She paused. He wanted to know if I'd heard from you. If I knew where you were. I closed my laptop, my full attention on the phone now. What did you tell him? Nothing. I said I didn't know. Another pause. But honey, he seemed really worried. He said you're having some kind of breakdown. That you disappeared after a small disagreement and won't answer anyone's calls. I could hear it in her voice, that little seed of doubt. My mother had always liked Brandon. He'd been charming at family dinners, helpful around their house, the kind of son-in-law who remembered birthdays and brought wine to Thanksgiving. Mom, I said carefully. Did he tell you what the small disagreement was about? He said it was a misunderstanding. That his brothers played a prank that went too far, but he's been trying to apologize for weeks and you won't let him. A prank. That's what he was calling it. Not abandonment. Not cruelty. Just a prank that went too far. I took a breath and told her everything. The real version. The rest stop, the planning, the group chat messages that went back 9 months. The GPS data showing he'd driven straight to the wedding while I was stranded. The social media posts celebrating while I walked 3 miles down a highway in the desert heat. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Mom. I'm here. Her voice sounded different now. Smaller. Oh Haley. Oh honey. I had no idea. He seemed so genuine. That's what he does, I said. He makes people believe his version of things. I'm so sorry. He was crying now. I should have known. I should have asked more questions. You didn't know because I didn't tell you. I was too embarrassed. You have nothing to be embarrassed about. Her voice was fierce now, the mom voice from my childhood when someone had hurt me. That man. I can't believe he would do something like that. We talked for another hour. By the end, she'd promised not to give Brandon any information about me, to tell my father everything, to stop being polite if Brandon showed up again. You're my daughter, she said before we hung up. Not him. You. 2 days later, I got a message that hit differently. It was from Sarah, my friend back in Tucson. We'd been close once, grabbed coffee weekly, complained about clients, celebrated each other's wins. She'd been at my wedding, had toasted to our happiness with champagne she'd bought specifically because it was my favorite. The message was casual. Too casual. Hey girl, I know you and Brandon are going through something. He came by asking if I knew where you were. I didn't tell him anything, but I wanted to give you a heads up. Hope you're doing okay. I stared at the message for a long time before responding with a simple, thanks for letting me know. But something felt wrong. The phrasing. The timing. 2 days later, Maya came home from the hospital with information that confirmed my instincts. So weird thing, she said, dropping her bag on the couch. One of the nurses I work with, Jenny, mentioned she has a friend in Tucson. Apparently this friend's been asking around about you. Wanted to know if anyone knew where you worked in San Diego, what neighborhood you lived in. My blood went cold. What was the friend's name? Maya checked her phone. Sarah something. Sarah Donovan. There was. Sarah had been feeding Brandon information. Playing both sides. Pretending to give me a heads up while actively helping him track me down. I thought about all the times she'd laughed at Brandon's jokes, even the ones that were at my expense. How she'd always found excuses when I tried to talk to her about problems in my marriage. Oh, all couples go through rough patches, she'd say, dismissing my concerns like they were trivial. She'd never been my friend. She'd been Brandon's fan. I blocked her on every platform I could think of. Facebook, Instagram, her phone number. Cut her out with the same surgical precision I'd used on Brandon and his brothers. Maya watched me do it. You okay? Yeah. And I meant it. Just getting rid of dead weight. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. And I was done pretending otherwise. Rebecca called the next week with an update that made everything worth it. We need to meet, she said. I have something to show you. Her office was organized chaos when I arrived. Files spread across her desk, her computer screen showing what looked like social media profiles. She gestured for me to sit. Brandon's attorney is still pushing hard on the abandonment narrative, she said. Claiming you left without cause, that you're being vindictive. But I've been busy. She turned her laptop around. On the screen were Facebook photos I'd never seen. Cole and Grant at the wedding, arms around each other, wearing those matching brotherhood over everything shirts. Another photo showed Brandon in the background, mid-laugh, holding a beer. The timestamp read 9:47 p.m. September 14th. The same night they'd left me. There's more, Rebecca said, clicking through. Breakfast photos the next morning. All three of them looking exhausted but happy. A video someone had posted of Grant making a toast at the wedding, talking about the bonds of brotherhood that nothing can break. They documented everything, Rebecca said. They were so sure you'd come home embarrassed and apologetic that they didn't even think to hide it. I stared at the photos. At Brandon's face. At the evidence of his celebration. We're going to bury them with this, Rebecca said quietly. Every single piece. And for the first time since that rest stop, I felt something that wasn't anger or hurt or betrayal. I felt power. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in March, exactly 18 months after that rest stop. I woke up at 5 a.m. even though the hearing wasn't until 10. Couldn't sleep. Kept running through everything in my head, imagining all the ways it could go wrong. What if the judge didn't believe me? What if Brandon showed up with some explanation that made me look crazy? What if his attorney was better than Rebecca? Maya made me eggs I couldn't eat and coffee I drank too fast. She'd taken the day off work to come with me, sitting at the kitchen table in her scrubs from the night shift, refusing to leave me alone. You're going to be fine, she said for the third time. Rebecca knows what she's doing. I nodded, but my hands were shaking when I tried to put on my earrings. Rebecca had told me what to wear. Simple, professional, sympathetic. I'd chosen a navy dress that didn't wrinkle, minimal makeup, my hair pulled back in a low ponytail. Nothing flashy. Nothing that could be used against me. I looked like someone's kindergarten teacher or a librarian. Harmless. Trustworthy. The opposite of the unstable, vindictive woman Brandon's attorney had painted in his filings. The courthouse was downtown, all concrete and glass with metal detectors at the entrance and security guards who looked bored. Maya held my hand while we waited for Rebecca in the lobby. People moved around us. Lawyers in suits, defendants in their best clothes, families clustered together whispering. Everyone here was having the worst day of their life in one way or another. Rebecca arrived at 9:30, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a charcoal suit that meant business. She looked calm. Confident. Like she'd done this 1,000 times and knew exactly how it would end. Ready? She asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We took the elevator to the third floor and walked down a hallway that smelled like floor polish and anxiety. Rebecca pushed through a set of double doors into a courtroom that was smaller than I'd expected. More like a large office than the dramatic spaces you see on TV. Brandon's attorney was already there. A man in his 50s wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first car. He was setting up files at the defendant's table, looking unbothered by everything. But Brandon wasn't there. I scanned the courtroom twice, thinking maybe I'd missed him. But no. Just his lawyer. Rebecca noticed me looking. Interesting, she murmured. Brandon's attorney approached us before we could sit down. Ms. Winters, he said, extending his hand. Dale Morrison. Rebecca shook it without warmth. Mr. Morrison. My client won't be attending today, Morrison said. He's dealing with a family emergency. How convenient, Rebecca said dryly. Morrison smiled like she'd told a joke. We're prepared to proceed without him if the court allows it. A family emergency. That's what he was calling it. I knew the truth though. Brandon couldn't face what he'd done. Couldn't sit across from me and pretend he was the victim while Rebecca dismantled his lies piece by piece. He was a coward. Always had been. The judge entered at exactly 10 a.m. A woman in her early 60s with silver hair and the kind of sharp eyes that suggested she'd heard every excuse in the book and believed none of them. The bailiff called the court to order and everyone sat. Judge Patricia Harmon. I'd looked her up online the night before. 20 years on the bench, reputation for no-nonsense rulings, 3 grown children. Rebecca had seemed pleased when we'd gotten her name. Good sign, she'd said. Judge Harmon doesn't have patience for games. The judge reviewed the documents in front of her while the courtroom sat in silence. I tried to keep my hands still in my lap, but they kept twisting together. Maya had wanted to come in with me, but only Rebecca was allowed at the table. She was sitting in the gallery behind us instead, a steady presence I could feel without turning around. Finally, Judge Harmon looked up. Mr. Morrison, she said. Your client isn't present? Morrison stood. No, Your Honor. He's dealing with a family emergency but has authorized me to proceed on his behalf. The judge made a note. Very well. Let's begin. Morrison went first and I had to hand it to him. He was good at his job. He painted a picture of me that barely resembled reality. According to him, I was unstable, vindictive, irrational. A woman who'd abandoned her marriage after a minor misunderstanding between family members, and then disappeared without warning, refusing all attempts at reconciliation. My client's wife left their home and marriage without any communication, Morrison said, pacing in front of the judge's bench like he was performing for a jury that wasn't there. She cut off all contact, blocked his attempts to reach her, and has shown no willingness to engage in any form of mediation or counseling. What we have here, Your Honor, is abandonment in its clearest form. I felt my jaw clench. Abandonment. He was actually using that word. Like I was the one who'd driven away and left someone stranded in the desert. Rebecca waited until Morrison sat down before standing. She didn't pace. Didn't perform. Just stood at our table with a calm that felt more powerful than any theatrics. Your Honor, she said. Mr. Morrison has presented a version of events that is not supported by the evidence. May I? The judge nodded. Proceed. Rebecca approached the bench with a folder. What Mr. Morrison calls a minor misunderstanding was actually a premeditated act of cruelty planned over 9 months. She handed copies to the judge and Morrison. These are screenshots from a group chat between Mr. Mercer and his brothers Cole and Grant Mercer. As you can see, they discussed abandoning Mrs. Mercer at a remote rest stop in extensive detail, including timing, location, and backup stories if she somehow made it home before them. The judge read in silence. I watched her face, looking for any reaction, but she gave nothing away. Rebecca continued. Furthermore, we have GPS data from Mr. Mercer's phone showing that immediately after abandoning his wife 97 miles from home with no transportation and no cell service, he drove directly to a wedding in Sedona where he, and I quote from his brother's social media post, partied all night with the boys. She pulled out more documents. Photos this time. The ones from Facebook. Cole and Grant in their matching shirts. Brandon in the background laughing. The timestamp clear and damning. This was not poor judgment, Your Honor. This was calculated emotional abuse. And when Mrs. Mercer exercised her right to leave an abusive situation, Mr. Mercer began a sustained harassment campaign using multiple phone numbers to circumvent her attempts to block contact. Morrison stood. Your Honor, if I may. The judge held up a hand. I have questions first. She looked directly at Morrison. Your client claims this was a harmless prank. Can you explain why he and his brothers documented and celebrated it on social media while Mrs. Mercer was stranded? Morrison opened his mouth, then closed it. Your Honor, my client's brothers may have exercised poor judgment in their social media posts, but... Poor judgment, the judge repeated, her tone flat. And can you explain the 9 months of planning documented in these messages? That seems like more than poor judgment, counselor. More fumbling. I watched Morrison's confidence crack. Judge Harmon turned to the GPS evidence. According to this timeline, your client drove directly from the rest stop to Sedona, checked into a hotel and attended a wedding. He made no attempt to verify his wife's safety. No calls to local hospitals or police. He simply continued with his weekend plans. She looked up from the documents, and her expression was something I'd remember for the rest of my life. Not angry. Worse. Disappointed. Your client drove to a wedding and partied while his wife was abandoned 97 miles from home with no transportation, no cell service, and no way to contact help. That's not poor judgment, Mr. Morrison. That's cruelty. I felt tears sting my eyes. But for the first time in months they weren't tears of hurt. They were tears of validation. Someone in authority was finally calling it what it was. Judge Harmon closed the file folder in front of her with a decisive snap. I'm granting the divorce as requested, she said. Assets will be divided equally with no spousal support awarded to either party. Both parties are financially independent and capable of supporting themselves. She paused, looking directly at Morrison. Furthermore, based on the documented evidence of harassment and premeditation, I'm issuing a 2-year restraining order prohibiting Brandon Mercer, Cole Mercer, and Grant Mercer from contacting the petitioner through any means, phone, email, social media, or third-party intermediaries. Any violation will result in contempt charges. Rebecca squeezed my hand under the table. It was over. Judge Harmon's gavel came down with a sound that felt like a door closing. Final. Permanent. Morrison gathered his files in silence, not looking at us. Rebecca stood and helped me to my feet. My legs felt shaky like I'd just run a marathon. In the hallway outside, Maya was waiting. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. "It's over," I whispered into her shoulder. "Yeah, honey," she said. "It is." I expected to feel triumphant. Vindicated. Something big and dramatic. That I just felt tired. Bone-deep exhausted. But underneath the exhaustion was something else. Something lighter. Freedom. I walked out of that courthouse into San Diego sunshine that felt warmer than it had any right to in March, and realized I'd just closed a chapter I'd never wanted to write. Now finally I could start living my own story. Rebecca took Maya and me out for lunch after the hearing. A little bistro near the courthouse that specialized in overpriced salads and celebratory champagne. I barely tasted any of it. My mind was still back in that courtroom replaying Judge Harmon's words. "That's not poor judgment. That's cruelty." Someone had finally said it out loud. "So what now?" Maya asked, spearing a piece of grilled chicken. I set down my fork. "I built something new." And that's exactly what I did. With the divorce settled and $21,000 sitting in my personal account, I went looking for office space. Not because I needed it, I'd been working from Maya's couch for months just fine, but because I wanted it. Wanted something that was mine. A space that had nothing to do with Brandon or our shared house or the life I'd left behind. I found a tiny office in Ocean Beach, above a surf shop and next to a yoga studio. 200 square feet with a window overlooking the beach and rent I could actually afford. The landlord was a guy in his 70s named Pete who didn't ask questions when I showed up with first month's rent in cash. "Month to month okay?" he asked. "Perfect." I moved in that weekend with a folding table from Target, a second-hand desk chair and my laptop. Maya helped me hang a sign on the door. Thompson Design Studio. My maiden name. The one I'd been using professionally for months already. It felt like reclaiming something I'd given up without realizing it. My client list started growing organically. The hotel group I'd been working with referred me to a restaurant owner who needed a rebrand. One of Maya's nurse friends wanted a logo for her massage therapy side business and told 3 other nurses about me. A coffee shop owner saw my work online and hired me to redesign their menu boards and signage. Word of mouth. The kind of growth that felt earned instead of lucky. 6 months after opening the studio, I hired help. A design student named Kirsten who was in her senior year at San Diego State. All enthusiasm and raw talent that reminded me of myself at 23. She needed the experience for her portfolio. I needed someone to handle the grunt work, file organization, client correspondence, the administrative tasks that ate up creative time. We worked well together. She'd show me mock-ups and I'd give feedback, watching her grow more confident with each project. It felt good teaching someone else. Passing along what I'd learned. Work became my therapy in a way I hadn't expected. Every logo I designed, every website I built, every color palette I put together felt like proof that I could create something beautiful from nothing. That I had value beyond being someone's wife. The studio became my sanctuary. Some nights I'd work late just because I wanted to, watching the sunset through my window, listening to the sounds of the beach below. No one telling me I was working too much. No one making jokes about my little design business, like it was a hobby instead of a career. Just me and my work and the quiet satisfaction of building something that was entirely mine. Maya and I settled into a rhythm that felt like family. She'd work her 12-hour shifts at the hospital. Sometimes days, sometimes nights, depending on the rotation, and I'd adjust my schedule around hers. When she worked days, I'd have dinner waiting when she got home. Nothing fancy, just pasta or stir-fry or whatever I could throw together with the limited ingredients in her kitchen. We'd eat on the balcony overlooking the ocean, talking about our days. She'd tell me about difficult patients or hospital politics. I'd tell her about demanding clients or design challenges. Normal stuff. The kind of conversations that felt easy because neither of us was walking on eggshells. About a year after the divorce, Maya started dating someone from the hospital. A respiratory therapist named David who had kind eyes and a terrible sense of humor that somehow made it funnier. He'd come over for dinner sometimes and I'd watch the way he looked at Maya. Like she was the most interesting person in the room. Like her opinions mattered. Like he was lucky to be there. The way Brandon used to look at me before his brothers convinced him I was the burden instead of the partnership. I was genuinely happy for Maya. She deserved someone who treated her well. And David clearly did, bringing her coffee before her shifts, remembering the small things she mentioned in passing, showing up when he said he would. On my bad days, and there were still bad days, Maya would notice before I said anything. She'd find me staring at nothing, lost in thoughts about what my marriage had been versus what I'd believed it was. She never tried to fix it. Never offered empty platitudes about how I was better off or how Brandon wasn't worth it. She'd just sit with me, letting the silence stretch, and eventually say, "You're allowed to grieve even when you know leaving was right." And she was right. I could be grateful for my freedom and still mourn what I'd lost. Not Brandon specifically, but the dream of what I'd thought we were building together. Maya became more than a friend. She became the sister I'd never had, the family I'd chosen instead of the one I'd been born into. And that meant more than I knew how to express. 15 months after the divorce, I did something I'd been thinking about for weeks. There was a regional design competition I'd seen advertised online, open to independent designers and small studios across California. The theme was transformation. I'd been working on a pro bono project for a local women's shelter, developing their entire brand identity from scratch. Logo, website, marketing materials. All of it donated because it mattered to me in ways I couldn't quite articulate. The theme I developed was breaking free. Imagery of birds escaping from cages, chains dissolving into flowers, heavy doors opening to reveal light. Personal maybe. Probably too personal. But authentic. I submitted the portfolio on the deadline day, not expecting anything. 2 months later, I got an email saying I'd won first place in the nonprofit category. I stared at the screen for a full minute, rereading the message to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. First place. Out of 63 submissions. The prize was $1,500 and a feature in a design magazine. Maya insisted we celebrate. She made reservations at a restaurant I'd never have chosen for myself. The kind of place with cloth napkins and a wine list instead of a wine selection. We sat at a table overlooking the bay, watching boats drift past in the twilight. "You did this," Maya said, raising her glass of champagne. "You built this life from nothing." I thought about where I'd been 18 months ago. Standing in a rest stop parking lot with nothing but a purse and the crushing realization that my marriage was a lie. Then the bus to San Diego with borrowed pajamas and no plan beyond running away. Now I had an award-winning business. A studio with my name on the door. Clients who trusted me. An assistant who looked up to me. "Not nothing," I said, clicking my glass against hers. "I had help." Maya shook her head. "I gave you a couch and some dinner. You did everything else." Maybe she was right. Maybe I had done this. Built something real and valuable from the ruins of what I'd lost. The thought made me feel something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. 2 years after the rest stop, almost to the day, I was having coffee at a beachside cafe when something happened that changed everything again. I was working on a logo revision for a local brewery, laptop open, earbuds in, completely absorbed in adjusting the kerning on some text. The cafe was busy with the usual morning crowd. Surfers grabbing breakfast, tourists taking photos, locals working remotely. Movement caught my eye. A couple near the parking lot, their body language tense even from a distance. The woman was crying, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. The man was talking, but his posture was all wrong. Dismissive, irritated, one hand waving like he was brushing away her words. I watched them without meaning to. Watched the woman try to explain something, her voice rising. Watched the man cut her off, shaking his head like she was being unreasonable. I felt that old familiar twist in my stomach. The urge to intervene. To walk over there and tell that woman she deserved better. That dismissiveness is just the beginning. That if he's waving away her feelings now, it only gets worse. But I stayed in my seat, earbuds dangling around my neck, coffee getting cold. Because I realized something sitting there in that cafe with the morning sun warm on my face. I'd spent years trying to fix my marriage. Years trying to be enough for Brandon, trying to win over his brothers, trying to smooth over every conflict and pretend the problems were smaller than they were. I'd blamed myself for not being cooler, funnier, less sensitive. For needing things like respect and consideration and basic human decency. I'd carried that blame like a weight, convinced that if I'd just been different, better, everything would have worked out. Watching that couple argue in the parking lot, I finally understood what I should have known all along. It was never my fault. I couldn't have loved Brandon into being a better husband. I couldn't have changed who Cole and Grant were or convinced them I was worthy of basic kindness. I couldn't have saved a marriage to someone who saw me as a burden instead of a partner. The only thing I could control was walking away. And I had. I'd walked away from the rest stop. Away from Tucson. Away from a life that was slowly suffocating me while I pretended everything was fine. I'd walked away and I'd built something better. The couple in the parking lot got into separate cars and drove off in different directions. I didn't know if they'd work it out or if she'd realize what I'd taken too long to learn. But I knew I'd finally forgiven myself for staying as long as I did. And that felt like freedom all over again. I packed up my laptop and walked back to the studio, that realization about forgiveness still settling in my chest like something solid and real. The afternoon was perfect. One of those San Diego days where the temperature hovers at 75 and the breeze smells like salt and possibility. Kirsten was at her desk when I walked in, headphones on, working on mock-ups for a coffee roaster rebrand. She looked up and pulled one earbud out. "You okay?" she asked. "You look different." "I'm good," I said. And I meant it. I settled at my desk and opened my laptop, planning to finish the brewery logo I'd been tweaking all morning. But my phone buzzed before I could pull up the file. Unknown number. I almost dismissed it. Probably spam or a client calling from a number I didn't have saved. But something made me open it. "Haley, it's Brandon. Please don't delete this." My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, reading the first line over and over. "I know I have no right to contact you, but I need you to know something. I'm sorry. For everything. You deserved better than what I gave you. Better than what my brothers and I did. I've been in therapy for a year trying to understand why I treated you that way. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that leaving me was the right choice, and I'm sorry it took me this long to see it." I set the phone down like it might burn me. 2 years. 2 years of silence, of building a new life, of learning to exist without constantly checking over my shoulder. And now this. Kirsten was watching me. "Bad news." "No," I said slowly. "Just unexpected." I picked up the phone again and reread the message. The words seemed genuine. Humble even. The Brandon I'd known would never have admitted he was wrong, never acknowledged that I'd made the right choice, never apologized without qualifying it with excuses. 2 years ago this message would have meant everything. It might have tempted me to respond, to open a dialogue, maybe even to forgive and forget. But that was 2 years ago. That was a different Haley. I locked my phone and slid it into my desk drawer. That night, lying in bed in my apartment, my own apartment now, a one-bedroom I'd moved into 6 months ago when I could finally afford it, I couldn't stop thinking about Brandon's message. Something was nagging at me, an itch I couldn't scratch. I hadn't checked my old email account in over a year. The one I'd set up when I first started freelancing, the one tied to my old life in Tucson. I'd stopped using it after the divorce, switching everything over to a new address that had no connection to Brandon or that version of myself. But the account still existed. Somewhere in the digital ether, still collecting messages I'd never see. I grabbed my laptop from the nightstand and opened it in bed, the screen casting blue light across the dark room. Took me 3 tries to remember the password. When the inbox finally loaded, my breath caught. 52 unread messages from Brandon. All of them with subject lines that made my chest tight. "I'm sorry. Please read this. You were right. I understand now." I scrolled through them, watching the dates stretch backward across 2 years. The most recent was from 2 days ago. The oldest was from 3 months after the divorce was finalized. I started reading chronologically, clicking through message after message. The early ones were what I expected. Deflection disguised as apology, paragraphs explaining how his brothers had influenced him, how he'd been confused, how he wanted to talk if I'd just give him a chance. Still making excuses. Still not quite getting it. But around month 6 something shifted. The messages got shorter. More direct. "I've started therapy. My counselor says I have codependency issues with my brothers. That I prioritize their approval over your well-being. She's right. Month 8. Cole and Grant still don't think they did anything wrong. I'm realizing I can't keep people in my life who refuse to take accountability. Even family. Month 10. I cut contact with my brothers today. Should have happened years ago. I'm sorry it took losing you to see that. I kept reading, watching Brandon's evolution unfold in reverse. Therapy sessions. Revelations about his childhood and family dynamics. Slow, painful growth toward understanding what he'd done and why. The messages from year 2 were different entirely. Reflective. Accepting. I don't expect you to respond to any of these. I just needed to say it even if you never read it. You were never the problem. I was. I saw your design work got featured in that magazine. You're doing exactly what you should be doing. I'm proud of you even though I have no right to be. I hope you found happiness. Real happiness, not the kind I pretended was enough. The final email sent 2 days ago was longer than the others. I hired a private investigator to find you. Not to contact you, I know I'm not allowed, but to make sure you're okay. He says you're doing well in San Diego. That you have your own studio, your own apartment, your own life. I'm glad. You deserve to be happy, and I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to run away to find it. This is the last time I'll reach out. Not because the restraining order expired, but because I finally understand that my growth shouldn't be your burden. You don't owe me forgiveness. You don't owe me closure. You don't owe me anything. I just wanted you to know that you were right to leave. About everything. I'm sorry I made you doubt yourself. I'm sorry I made you feel small. I'm sorry I chose my brothers over my wife. I'm sorry for all of it. I hope you never think about me. I hope you've moved on so completely that this message is just an annoyance instead of a wound. You deserve that kind of peace. Be happy, Haley. Brandon. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of my bedroom, listening to the distant sound of waves through the open window. Brandon's growth seemed genuine. The kind that comes from actual work instead of performance. He'd acknowledged everything. The cruelty, the planning, the choice to prioritize his brothers, the way he'd made me feel like I was the problem. 2 years ago I'd needed to hear exactly these words. They would have validated every doubt, every moment I'd questioned whether I was overreacting or being too sensitive. Part of me felt vindicated reading them now. He finally understood what he'd destroyed. Finally saw the truth I'd been trying to show him for years. But the bigger part of me, the part that mattered, felt nothing. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Not even pity. Just indifference. Because the Haley who'd needed Brandon's apology didn't exist anymore. That woman had stood in a desert rest stop believing she'd somehow failed, that she should have been better, cooler, less needy, less much. I'd left her behind somewhere between the Greyhound bus and the courthouse steps. The woman I'd become didn't need Brandon to admit he was wrong. Didn't need his validation or his belated understanding. I'd built a new life without him, a new identity, a new understanding of what I deserved. Brandon's growth was good for him. I was genuinely glad he'd gotten therapy, cut ties with his toxic brothers, learned to be accountable. But it didn't change anything for me. The next morning I was at the studio early, coffee in hand, working on the brewery rebrand Kirsten had mentioned. My phone buzzed with a text from her. New client inquiry. Local bookstore wants signage and social media graphics. Interested? I smiled and started typing a response. Then I opened my laptop and navigated to my email settings. Found that old account. The one with 52 messages from a man I used to be married to. I hovered over the delete account button for maybe 10 seconds. Then I clicked it. A confirmation screen appeared. Are you sure? This action cannot be undone. I clicked yes. The account disappeared. Brandon's messages disappeared with it. The last thread connecting me to that old life severed. I felt lighter immediately. My phone buzzed again. Maya, dinner tonight? David's cooking and he's convinced he can make pad thai better than the restaurant. I laughed and texted back, I'll bring wine. Outside my window, the ocean sparkled in the morning sun. Surfers were already out catching waves. Tourists walked the boardwalk with ice cream. A street musician was setting up his guitar near the pier. Life happening all around me. Normal, beautiful, ordinary life. I'd figured out my own way back just like Brandon had yelled at me to do in that rest stop parking lot. But I hadn't found my way back to him or to Tucson or to the woman I'd been when I was trying to be enough for someone who would never value me. I'd found my way back to myself. To the person I'd been before I started shrinking to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. And that person was happy. Genuinely, completely happy. Not because Brandon had apologized. Not because he'd finally understood what he'd lost. Not because I'd won some imaginary war or proven I was right all along. but because I'd built a life so full and so satisfying that the people who'd hurt me had become irrelevant footnotes in a story that was no longer about them. That was the real revenge. Not making them suffer but making them irrelevant. I opened a new design file and got to work. The best way back wasn't to them. It was to me. And I'd never been happier. If this story of finding freedom had you hooked from start to finish, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when the judge called Brandon's actions what they really were. Cruelty, not a prank. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.